The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen blinds, casting thin stripes across the white tile floor. I stirred my coffee absently, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clink of Claire's spoon against her cereal bowl. Our daughter Emma was already dressed and ready for school, sitting across from me coloring silently. Claire glanced up at the clock, said something about the traffic on Route 1, then gathered her keys and kissed Emma on the head. She barely looked at me as she left. This was normal. Too normal. We weren't angry. We weren't anything. Our conversations had become purely logistical. Who was picking up Emma? What bills were due? When her next orthodontist appointment was? There hadn't been a fight. No explosion, no drama. Just erosion. Something inside me had been worn smooth by years of compromise and avoidance. The intimacy that once sparked between us had been buried under shared responsibilities and mutual exhaustion. After dropping Emma at school, I drove straight to the office, parked, stared at the building. I didn't go in. Instead, I opened my email on my phone, scrolled through the subject lines, and then let it fall back into the passenger seat. Without thinking, I pulled out of the lot, turned onto the freeway, and just kept driving. I didn't even tell Claire. Didn't text, didn't call. I knew I'd face questions later, but right then I didn't care. I just needed space. The road stretched ahead like an invitation. I passed familiar exits, Concord, Manchester, then smaller towns, where the speed limit dropped and the roads grew narrow and curved. I rolled the windows down and let the cold air whip through the car. Somewhere along the way, I put on an old playlist: Springsteen, Tom Petty, Van Morrison, the kind of music I used to listen to before life got complicated. My mind wandered to college days, to nights spent staring up at the stars with friends and bottles of beer, wondering who we'd become. I thought about the first time Claire and I kissed, how full of light everything had once felt. When had it dimmed? By early afternoon, I was somewhere in central Vermont. I pulled into a gas station, filled the tank, and grabbed a coffee. Then, instead of heading back, I turned off the main road and followed a winding route toward the lake I hadn't seen in years. Lake Norcross. It hit me as soon as I saw the sign. My uncle used to own a cabin there. We'd spend weekends fishing, canoeing, roasting marshmallows by the fire. I hadn't been back since his funeral over a decade ago. Something inside me tightened. Nostalgia, maybe. Or the ache of a life that had once felt wide open. I kept driving until I reached the road that led down to the lake. The trees grew dense around the curve, the late autumn foliage a riot of orange and red. I slowed as the gravel crunched under the tires. There, just beyond the bend, the cabin stood. Weathered, quiet, but not abandoned. A truck was parked out front. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was living there. I eased the car to a stop, my fingers resting on the steering wheel, unsure what exactly I was doing. Part of me wanted to turn around to avoid the awkwardness of explaining myself. But something else, something deeper, held me there. I stepped out. The air smelled like wood smoke and pine. The door opened. And that's when I saw him. Jason. The voice was deeper now, but familiar enough to break through the fog of years. I turned my head toward it and saw him, Eli, framed in the cabin doorway, backlit by the flicker of firelight from inside. He looked almost exactly like I remembered, but older, solid. His beard was full, streaked with silver, and his eyes had that same clear, observant calm they'd had when we were kids. Back then, Eli was always the one who knew how to tie a better knot, catch more fish, start a fire in the rain. He used to live on the property next to my uncle's, and they'd grown close after Eli's dad passed. "I'll be damned," he said, stepping onto the porch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I feel like I have," I said, and, despite the surprise, I found myself smiling. He stepped down and pulled me into a firm hug, smelling faintly of cedar smoke and earth. It felt grounding, like coming back to something I hadn't realized I'd missed. "I thought this place would have been sold off years ago," I said as we walked inside. "I bought it off your aunt after your uncle passed. Didn't want to see it rot away." The interior hadn't changed much. Same rough-hewn walls, same stone fireplace. A few new touches. Eli's handiwork, I guessed. Shelves of books, handmade furniture, a pile of split wood neatly stacked by the hearth. "Sit," he said, motioning to the old leather armchair. "You drink beer still?" "God, yes." He handed me a bottle, then settled onto the sofa with one of his own. The fire crackled between us. For a while, we just drank in silence. No awkwardness, no rush to explain. "So what brings you here?" he asked eventually. I hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know. Just started driving. This place kinda called me back, I guess." He nodded like he understood. "That happens sometimes. The road knows before we do." We stayed up late catching up. I told him about my job, about Claire and Emma. Carefully edited. Not quite. Lying, but not telling everything either. He told me how, after a stint in Colorado, he returned to Vermont and started working with his hands, carving furniture, guiding hikers, fixing cabins in the area. His voice was slow, deliberate, as if every word mattered. "What made you come back here?" I asked. He shrugged. "Wanted something quieter, truer. This place has a rhythm, I understand. That, and your uncle. He was like a second father, to me. Felt right to stay close." We let the fire die down before heading to bed. He offered me the guest room just like that. No questions asked. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Eli was already dressed, splitting logs out back when I joined him. I grabbed a spare axe and helped. The rhythm of the work filled the space between us. Thunk, breathe, thunk. Later we hiked up the trail behind the cabin. The trees opened to a view of the lake glinting below. We talked about old memories, summers swimming, fishing trips, how my uncle used to tell the same damn ghost story every year. We laughed. But there was something unspoken between us, an undercurrent I didn't quite know how to name. At one point, he brushed past me on the narrow trail, his arm grazing mine. It was nothing. It was everything. I felt the heat rise in my neck, the questions I'd never allowed myself to ask beginning to circle. I didn't know what I was feeling. I only knew it had been a long time since I'd felt anything at all. The days passed like clouds shifting overhead, slow, quiet, full of weight I couldn't name. By Saturday morning, the rhythm of the place had settled into me. I didn't check my phone. I didn't worry about what Claire might be thinking, or if Emma had soccer practice, or whether I'd remembered to set the trash bins out. Instead, I stood on the porch with a mug of strong coffee, watching Eli tend the fire pit. He moved without hurry, every action purposeful. Something about him unnerved me, but not in a threatening way. It was more like he saw through me, and maybe he had all along. That morning we worked on replacing some of the cabin's porch railing. I held boards while he drilled. Our arms brushed once. I didn't flinch. I should have, maybe, but I didn't. "I always thought you'd end up somewhere far from here," Eli said as he measured out a new cut. "I thought so too," I replied, "but somehow I ended up in a place that looks perfect on paper and feels like nothing." He didn't comment. He didn't have to. Later we shared lunch at the small wooden table inside, bowls of lentil stew and warm bread Eli had made from scratch. At one point I reached to grab the salt and our hands touched. Just a graze, a heartbeat's length, but I pulled back too fast. "Sorry," I muttered. He looked at me steady. "Don't be." The air thickened then, and not from the heat of the fire. I stood to clear the dishes, my hand trembling slightly as I gathered the bowls. He didn't follow me into the kitchen, just let me have space. I appreciated it more than I could say. That afternoon we took the canoe out. The lake was smooth as glass, the silence so complete that every paddle stroke echoed in my ears. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. There was something sacred in the stillness, something I hadn't felt in years. I watched Eli's hands on the oar, the roll of his shoulders, the calm set of his jaw. How many years had I gone without noticing another human like this? How long had I been moving through life numb, just doing what was expected? Claire and I hadn't really talked in months. Oh, we spoke, but not in a way that meant anything. Everything between us had become about Emma, the bills, the schedule. Somewhere along the way I'd disappeared. I realized then I hadn't let myself want anything in a long, long time. That night it dropped below freezing. We sat close by the fire again, trading stories and pouring small glasses of whiskey. At some point the power blinked out. Some transformer down the road, Eli said. Gonna be a cold night, he added, tossing another log on. I've got an extra blanket if you need. When I got up to head to the guest room, he handed me one, thick, woolen, and warm. I stood there holding it for a moment, not moving, until he stepped closer. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, just thinking. I went to bed and lay awake for what felt like hours. The blanket smelled like pine and smoke. I thought about the way Eli had looked at me. Not expectant, not pushy, just open. I thought about how I'd been waiting, all this time for someone to give me permission to feel. Sometime in the night I dreamt of him. Not in a way I understood as desire exactly, but something quieter, older. We were sitting on the dock, feet in the water. The sun was setting. He turned to me and smiled, and I felt peace. Not excitement, not guilt, just peace. When I woke up, my chest ached like something had cracked open. And for the first time in years, I didn't push the feeling away. The rain began with a whisper, just a light tapping against the roof. And then as evening folded into night, it became a steady roar. Thunder cracked in the distance, and the wind bent the trees outside the windows. Inside the cabin, we lit candles, placing them on windowsills and the edge of the mantel. Their glow cast long shadows across the wood-paneled walls, warm and flickering. I sat cross-legged on the floor, a blanket around my shoulders, nursing a half-glass of whiskey. Eli sat across from me in the armchair, one knee pulled up, eyes on the flames. Neither of us said much for a long while. The fire was enough, the storm speaking over us. The power had gone out an hour ago, but I barely noticed. I didn't want to look at my phone. I didn't care what time it was. Eventually I spoke. I don't remember the last time I felt like this, I said, my voice low. Still, present, not performing. Eli looked over at me. Performing for who? I shrugged, pulling the blanket tighter. Everyone. Claire, my co-workers. Even Emma sometimes, which is the worst part. Like I have to be this version of a dad, of a man, that I don't even believe in. He didn't jump in. He let the silence hold. I don't think I've been happy in a long time, I said. Not in the way that matters. Eli set his glass down. Then why stay in it? I looked at him, unsure how to answer. Because it's safe. Because people depend on me. Because I'm afraid. The truth was a knot in my chest. I couldn't untangle it all at once. Because it's what I chose, I said finally weakly. Doesn't mean you can't choose again, he replied. The words didn't carry judgment, just quiet certainty. I stared at him across the candlelight, the rain filling the space between us with its relentless rhythm. His eyes didn't move from mine. I felt something shift. No sudden surge, no dramatic music cue. Just a soft unraveling of a thread I hadn't even known I was holding too tightly. He stood slow and calm and crossed the room, sat next to me on the floor, close but not touching. You look exhausted, he said. I am, I whispered. He didn't move closer. I did. It was subtle, my shoulder brushing against his, then staying there. I felt the heat of his skin through the flannel of his shirt. The pause that followed was thick with breath and unsaid things. I turned toward him slightly. He met me, halfway. The kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't urgent or greedy. It wasn't charged with shame. It was quiet, real, like a question and an answer folded into one. His hand brushed the side of my face, not possessive, just there, grounding me, welcoming me. I didn't pull back. If anything, I leaned into it. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't rush. We didn't try to define anything or escape into explanations. We just stayed there in the silence and the candlelight as the storm raged beyond the walls. Later, we lay side by side on the couch, sharing a heavy quilt. Eli's hand rested on my chest, warm and still. My own hand covered his. The fire dimmed, the storm easing to a gentle drizzle. I stared at the ceiling and let the thoughts come. What did this mean? What would happen when I left? What would what would Emma feel? Could I even go back to the way things were? But layered between all those questions, something else lingered. Relief. Like I had let go of a burden I didn't even know I was carrying. I felt raw, exposed, but also more alive than I'd felt in years. There was no plan, no certainty. But in Eli's quiet presence, I didn't need either. He shifted beside me, fingers tracing slow circles over my shirt. "You okay?" he asked, softly. I nodded. "Yeah, just waking up, I think." "Good," he said, and that was it. No promises, no labels, just two men, in the stillness, sharing a moment neither of us could name, but both understood. The morning light broke gently through the curtains, casting a golden hue across the wooden floor. I lay still for a while, eyes open, listening to the quiet. The storm had passed, and the world outside the cabin was soaked but calm. Birds tentatively, returning their songs to the air. Tree branches dripping like an exhale after holding their breath all night. Eli was already up. I could hear the soft clinking of mugs and the low creak of a cabinet door. I got dressed slowly, pulling on yesterday's jeans and a hoodie, my mind oddly calm. I expected to feel panic, maybe shame, maybe confusion, but none of those showed up. There was only a stillness, a quiet knowing. In the kitchen, Eli handed me a mug of coffee without a word. I took it, nodding, our fingers grazing for a moment. He leaned against the counter while I sat at the table. The room smelled of fresh brew and pine smoke. It felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be, at least for right now. "I don't know what this means," I said eventually, voice soft. "I know," Eli replied. "I don't know what happens next." He nodded slowly. "You don't have to know yet." There was no pressure in his voice, no sadness either. Just a kind of peace, the kind you get when something finally makes sense, even if you don't know what to do with it. "It mattered," I said. "Whatever this was, it mattered." "I know," he said again. That was enough. We didn't try to turn the moment into a story or a promise. That would have cheapened it. It was something we both understood without needing to define. I packed my bag slowly, folded my clothes instead of shoving them in. Every movement felt deliberate, like I was marking time. Eli didn't hover. He was in the other room tending to something with his hands. I looked around the cabin, at the uneven floorboards, the old books stacked on shelves, the mug I'd used every morning. It had all become familiar so fast. When it was time to go, we met at the door. I looked at him for a long second, unsure of what to say. He saved me the trouble. "Drive safe," he said with a small smile. I reached for the door, hesitated, then turned back. We embraced, no theatrics, no desperation. Just two men holding something fragile and unspoken between them. I stepped out into the morning air, the lake glinting in the distance. My car looked out of place here, too clean, too corporate. I got in, started the engine, and backed out of the dirt driveway. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. The trees blurred past in shades of green and gold. I stopped once at a gas station, bought water and a sandwich I didn't eat. I watched a couple laugh near the pumps, and it hit me how much I'd forgotten that kind of ease could exist. As the miles ticked by, the distance between the cabin and my house grew, but it didn't feel like a return. It felt like a crossing. I wasn't going back. I was moving forward into something unknown. I thought of Claire, of Emma, of what I'd say. I didn't have the answers, but I wasn't pretending anymore. That was the difference. I wasn't numbing or performing. I'd looked in the mirror, really looked, and I'd seen someone who still had the capacity to feel, to want, to be honest even when it scared the hell out of him. What happened with Eli wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a fantasy, it was a moment of truth. The kind you don't get often, the kind that changes the temperature of your soul. I didn't know what would come next, whether I'd try to fix things at home or walk away from them, but I knew I owed myself more than survival. I owed myself truth, integrity, feeling. By the time I pulled onto my street, the sun was high, and my shoulders had relaxed. The weight of obligation was still there, but it wasn't crushing me. I could carry it differently now. I turned off the engine and sat there for a while, looking at my front door, my house, my life. Something had shifted inside me permanently. I wasn't the man who drove away on Friday. That man had been hollowed out, afraid to ask what he wanted. The man coming home wasn't whole yet, but he'd started the work. He'd seen what was possible in a quiet cabin by a lake, with another man who expected nothing, offered everything, and asked only for honesty in return. And that, more than anything, was what I intended to keep. The driveway looked the same. So did the front door, the porch light that always buzzed faintly, the potted plants Claire kept even though she never remembered to water them. I sat in the car for a moment, engine off, keys in hand, watching the way the late afternoon sun hit the siding. It was like stepping into a photograph I'd looked at too long. Everything familiar yet oddly distant. I got out, slinging my bag over one shoulder, and walked to the door. Before I could open it, it creaked from the inside. Claire stood there, arms folded loosely. She wasn't angry, just guarded. Tired, maybe. She nodded once. "You're back," she said, like it was just another fact. "I am." We stood like that for a second, not speaking. Then, from inside, Emma's voice rang out, "Daddy?" And suddenly she was bounding down the hallway, arms flung wide, her laugh carrying more weight than I knew it could. I knelt, catching her mid-leap, and held her tightly. She chattered about her sleepover, her new drawing, a book they read in school. I listened, truly listened. The rhythm of the house resumed like a film unpaused. The dishwasher hummed. The TV murmured. In the background, Emma danced around the living room and Claire disappeared into the kitchen, her phone glowing in one hand. It would have been easy to slip back into the current, to let the pattern resume and carry me along. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Everything felt slightly off axis. The walls, the sounds, even the scent of the house. It wasn't bad, just different. I moved through it with more awareness now, touching things like I was making sure they were real. That night, Claire and I barely spoke beyond the logistics. Dinner, bedtime routines, a note about groceries. When we finally settled into bed, back to back, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt awake. In the morning, I made coffee and stood at the window while it brewed. I watched the neighbors leave for work, the mail truck drive past, the sprinklers kick on in the yard across the street. It all played out like a loop, and yet something inside me had rewired. The Jason who returned was not the Jason who had left. That man had been blurred by years of silence, buried beneath compromises and assumptions. Now I felt sharper, more present, like someone had cracked a window in a stale room and let the air back in. I started journaling again, a few pages each morning before anyone else was awake. Not about Eli, not directly, but about feelings, longings, hints of courage I didn't want to lose. I wrote about the woods, the storm, the silence, the kiss, the stillness after. There were days I'd catch myself smiling for no reason. Just a flicker, a memory, the sound of Eli's laugh, the feel of rain on the cabin roof, the steadiness of being held with no expectation. Claire noticed the difference, I think. She watched me more closely than usual. One night she asked, "Did something happen out there?" I didn't lie. I said, I needed time to think, and I did. She nodded. That was all. No accusation, no pressing, just space, awkward, but open. I think we both knew something had changed, even if neither of us was ready to name it. I haven't made any big decisions. I still go to work. I still sit through meetings, drive Emma to piano lessons, fold laundry on Sundays. But inside, there's a shift, a quiet refusal to fall back asleep. I think about Eli sometimes, more often than I let myself admit. I wonder if he's out chopping. Wood if the power's still out, if he's walking by the lake. I wonder if he thinks of me too, but I don't reach out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That weekend wasn't about starting something. It was about waking up. The future is still uncertain. Maybe Claire and I will have the hard conversation. Maybe we'll grow apart with grace, or maybe we'll find some new way of being together. Honest, stripped down raw. I don't know. That's the truth. But I'm not afraid of not knowing anymore. What I do know is this. I will not go back to the version of myself who moved through life untouched. I will not ignore the parts of me that still long to feel, to connect, to be seen. That cabin, that storm, that quiet night, it didn't solve anything. But it showed me what was possible. It cracked something open, and I'm not sealing it shut again. For now, I live with the questions, with the memory, with the promise I made to myself, even if I didn't speak it aloud. Never again will I pretend not to exist, and that I think is enough.